Hello and welcome to episode 282 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. My name is Mark. I am the green tank, and I'm joined as always by Kellen the red tank.
Yo, yo, yo.
And Neil in the orange tank.
Hey, hey, hey.
Oh, that
Sounds
was
like
awkward.
I had like a Fat Albert there, reference for all the 70s cartoon fans in the audience. On today's show, we're going to be doing another...
I'm not sure we should be referencing Fat Albert in 2023.
That's probably true. Oh, well, the voice of Fat Albert was a problem.
It's a whole Cosby joint, right? Isn't that the whole thing?
I know he was the voice
I think
of
it's
Fat
it's like very much like a Cosby.
You didn't want to
production.
reference him. You shouldn't have gone, hey, hey, hey.
Okay, fair enough.
Today's episode, we are returning to our Designer Spotlight series. This time, we are going to be doing a deep dive of one of the most influential designers of all time, probably among the greatest American designers of all time. That is going to be Sid Sackson. So, a review of his...
We're righting the wrong. He belongs on Mount Rushmore. And
Oh,
when
that's
I was
true.
not here and the Rushmore was decided, Sid Sackson was forgotten and thrown into the waste paper basket.
of history. Yeah, now that I've done some extensive research on him, I'll see if my thoughts have changed on whether or not he belongs among the Elite Four. But that is going to be coming up later on the show. But before we do that, we're going to be talking about the games we played. Callan's going to be talking about Magicalligraphy. I'll follow up with Hamlet, the village building game. And then finally, Neil will be telling us about Tournament at Camelot. But before that, an announcement about the show. From here on out, we are going to be switching to a once every other week format for the show. And then on the off weeks, on the weeks that we don't do a mainline show that you'll be seeing in your feed, we're going to be doing another bonus Patreon episode. There's going to be more about this on the Patreon page where we're going to be hashing out the details. But for anybody who just listens to the main show, the show that you're listening to now, we're going to be switching to a every other week format. And the reason we're doing this is, we've been doing the show now for 5 years every week, and we just got to a point where we realized that to produce the best shows possible and to maintain the quality of the show and of our lives, frankly, that we needed to switch to a every other week format. We didn't want to give you less than quality episodes. Quality has always been the hallmark of our show, at least that's the goal we've been striving for. And we felt like going every week would mean a dip in that quality, and we just didn't feel comfortable with that. So we're going to be switching to it every other week. And again, more details on our Patreon page.
Mark, this means you're contractually obligated to talk to me half as often. I don't know how I feel about this.
Yeah, no, that's one of the things I'm most excited about. All right, with that out of the way, let's talk about the games we played. Kellen, tell us about Magicalligraphy.
All right.
First of all, did you guys ever do calligraphy as kids?
No.
Yes.
I feel like that calligraphy pen was just such a draw to me. Whenever I saw that calligraphy pen, with like the big ink capsules and the nibs.
flat nibs. Yeah.
Yeah, I always wanted to do it. And I must have bought like 3 or 4 during the course of my childhood, but never stuck to it. I mean, not really disappointed about not sticking to it, because what would that have done for me today? But I was always drawn by it.
I remember actually my mom helping me carve like I think probably from like bamboo, like an actual calligraphy pen that like I used to dip in ink. Like,
oh wow,
yeah. So it was a whole thing for me.
Was there a reservoir there, or just like you dip it and draw it and dip it and draw it?
No. Yeah, it was just dip and draw.
Callan is a pure dip and draw.
What was it
Case
like
you're wondering.
kneeling in the Middle Ages?
Oh man, the things we had to do to keep ourselves entertained.
Magicalligraphy. I was going to joke about how it's hard to say this. Magicalligraphy. How does that go together? Who can say? But we've run out of joke time because of you jokers. Magicalligraphy is a handmade, imported from Japan, wood box, social deduction, drawing game. Mark, you're not going to believe this, and Neelan can believe it because he played it. That's the only reason. Otherwise, his mind would be blown. In this game box, you have a feather, and on the bottom of that feather is a brush. And then you put on a magic power ring. So there are 4 players, and they each put on a magic power ring, and they use that brush, and they dip that brush collectively. This is really hard to describe. Anyway, 3 out of 4 people at the table have the same shape, okay? And one person has a different shape. So you are collectively drawing a shape. And so the feather that you dip in water and then you use that water brush on a piece of water. What is the paper is like magic water paper.
Like
magic water
paper.
And so this would be really easy, right? To see, it's similar to like a fake artist goes to New York if you were taking turns doing it. But in this case, you're actually holding up string and you're all drawing together. So you're literally like abracadabering with your hand and you got the ring on, it's connected to this quill and you're going like, oh, how are we drawing the shape? And then the second someone like zigs when they're supposed to zag, everyone at the table like gets all excited and goes, you didn't know you had the wrong shape. That is the process of playing Magic Calligraphy. It's pretty actually surprisingly difficult to understand, but essentially there's a paintbrush, it's dipped in water, you're using color changing water paper, but you can't ever control the quill. You're controlling a string that's connected to the four corners of the quill. Very silly. It is just a artifact, right? A wood box, handmade. Neelan, what did you think of Magic Calligraphy?
It's a very silly game, but I think it's a delight because of the production of it. Like you said, it's a bespoke creation that I guess is individually handmade, presumably, and it's just like a lovely thing. The whole thing feels so delicate and fragile and ridiculous. I don't think the game is amazing when like a fake artist exists, but it's good. It's a lark. It's what you want from like a board game novelty.
Yeah, and it's like there's like 20 layers of oohing and awing here, right? You put the wood box out, people are oohing and awing, right? Then you open it up and there's a feather with 4 rings in the corners of the box because you're trying not to get the string all tied up. Then you pull that out, people are oohing and awing. Then you're like, where's the water? We got to fill up this jar with water, and people are like, what? Like this game requires water, and then you literally like people put the rings on wrong and you're like, no, take the ring off and put it back on like you're a wizard because you have to put the ring on, Mark, like put out your hand, right? Now imagine trying to draw, as a wizard holding out your hand.
Right.
And then at the bottom of it, it is funny and it does work to have to try to suss out who doesn't know what's happening. The shapes that you are encouraged to draw are all pretty similar to each other, so you can get lost in it. There is a point scoring system, but of course, who cares? We didn't care about it. This is good for a few rounds. I've brought it out with 2 or 3 different groups. Everyone has enjoyed it. This would be a good party staple to sort of just laugh at and show people to. I would say it does not have the staying power of the game that you're going to be playing over and over and over again, but it was super exciting to import, and I'm very happy to own it. That is Magic Calligraphy or Magic Calligraphy or Magic Calligraphy, one of those pronunciations.
As vibrant as your description was and as clear as it was, I was trying to follow along on the BGG page for the game, and I've discovered that it doesn't apparently exist. Does it go by a different name on BGG?
No, it does. You see what I'm saying? This is the magic. Here you go, Mark. Let me give it to you. This is what I'm saying. How could one spell or know this game?
Oh, is it an MAGIK situation?
I think it's a C. MAGICALL.
It's the word magic and the word calligraphy.
Oh, it is literally one word.
Yeah, what did you not hear my whole joke?
I thought it was a bad
beginning?
Kellen joke. Okay, sorry. I messed that up. Okay. Very nice.
You weren't imagining it, but now with the photo, you understand?
Yeah, no. Again, you were very clear in your description, but I just wanted the full immersion by seeing it. I wanted to see the feather.
So the 2 images on BGG did better than my 5 minutes of talking about it?
No. In fact,
yourself,
if
Mark.
anything, I'm disappointed by this image. I was hoping for more, but I'm looking at the image and I'm like, I already had this from Kellen's description, so I didn't even need this. So all that buildup was a waste of time, in fact. So it all worked out.
Oh, Mark wins. That is Magic Calligraphy. Thank you. Bye.
I got a chance to play Hamlet, the village building game, designed by David Chirkop and published by Mighty Boards. Chirkop's most well-known earlier designs include a couple of games that I've yet to play, including Pursuit of Happiness, as well as And Then We Held Hands, which is a game that I've always been intrigued by, as well as another game that he designed that I have played and enjoyed and was taught to us by listener Nate a few Gen Cons ago, Petrichor. Hamlet, the village building game, which I'll refer to as Hamlet going forward, is a game about building a hamlet together with your opponents, but unsurprisingly trying to be the best among your competitors in doing so.
Building a hamlet?
You're building a hamlet. This is an age-old theme in board games, Kellen. Hamlet building. It's a
All
mechanism.
right, isn't that a name of a Shakespeare character?
Yes.
Yes.
But also a small village.
But also the part of the name of a burger place. The Hamlet that you're building is made up of a collection of tiles that through the course of the game you're going to be adding to as the Hamlet expands. An interesting thing here about the tile laying is that the tiles come in a number of different sizes. So you're not getting a bunch of similarly sized hexagons or anything. You get anywhere from really small hexes to much larger, elaborate pieces, which make for a unique looking town every time. It's never going to look the same on the table the way you build it up, and you always have a bunch of little empty spaces where your tiles didn't completely line up. So you get a lot of weird shapes coming out of this game when all is said and done. I was actually a little worried about this aspect of the game, thinking that maybe the tile placement rules would be complicated because of the oddly shaped pieces, but thankfully the placement rules are pretty straightforward. As you build up this town, this hamlet, you'll have a number of different ways to score points. You can go to the town hall and buy the aforementioned tiles that you'll later add to the town. You can move your meeple to one of the production tiles where you'll fill up that tile supply of goods in exchange for some gold. And those goods that you're producing are placed on the tile and available to be used by anyone. So, for example, if you go to the forest tile and you decide to fill up that space with the wood resource, you're going to get paid 2 gold for your trouble, but you're going to populate the space with 3 wood that now anyone can use. And so it's a shared infrastructure game, at least in some respects. To place those tiles on the board, like I talked about earlier, you'll usually need to use resources, but those resources come from resource production spots that anyone can use, as I said before. But to use them, to actually expend the resources, you need to be able to trace a line from where the resources are back to the meeple that is actually doing the building via a network of donkey meeples. So that's the other type of meeple you have, which you're going to be manipulating, these donkey meeples. They're basically acting as a supply line, so you have to set them up during the course of the game to make sure that you have access to the goods that you want to where you need to get them. There's also a recipe fulfillment aspect to the game where you're trying to go to the market to satisfy the needs of different arrangements of goods that come up for victory points and gold. You can build roads to both score points in and of themselves while also making tiles and the aforementioned resources more accessible by building more roads. Speaking of those resources, later in the game, you can place tiles out that will let you produce refined resources. So these are slightly different than the basic resources in that you don't get anything for producing them right away, but once anybody uses the resources you've created, be it an opponent or yourself, to build like the more advanced tiles that come later in the game, the producer of the resource gets a benefit in coins and victory points. Finally, the last way to score points is to fill these larger contracts that thematically are parts of building the church, which is also the timer of the game. Once all the parts of the church get built, the game ends. So that's like the big contract fulfillment, the big way to score a lot of points, but also access the timer. There's more to it than that, but that's generally the gist of the game. You're using your meeples to generate shared resources, moving the meeples around to place more building tiles for the town, making sure you can access the resources that you need to build those tiles, and eventually get access to enough resources to fulfill the big contracts that result in the completion of the church, which ends the game. I generally like shared infrastructure games. I generally don't like tile placement games. And again, I especially wasn't excited by the really very tiled shapes and sizes in this game that I mentioned earlier. Again, I was worried that this was going to be a pain to sort of maintain and understand, but again, it didn't really prove to be too much of a problem. Also, not too much of a problem for me was the quite small iconography on the pieces and the tiles, though I will say it was definitely a problem for some of the people I played with. There are a lot of different types of icons in the game, and they are printed quite small on the tiles. So a heads up for anyone who has issues with smaller print or plays with groups that might have an issue with that.
This feels like it's one of the most presiding concerns I've seen with Hamlet at large. Is a lot of people complaining about how much of the small iconography is a problem, which is, I suppose, in the realm of good problems for your game to have. But yeah, kind of one of those things that feels like it could have easily just been caught in production.
Yeah, because the tiles aren't so small to require, you would think, that small iconography. And also, it's, again, a combination of small iconography plus a breadth of a lot of icons in the iconography. There's quite a lot of symbology there.
Yeah, I remember seeing Ava at Shut Up and Sit Down's lovely video about this that, she had some criticisms of it, but like it definitely caught my eye then. Like it sounds like Roads and Boats adjacent in terms of like, taking resources from other players and utilizing them, but probably not nearly as dynamic as that game, I would assume.
No, it's a much more scaled back version, I would say. Speaking of the issues that people have had that I didn't really find too much of a problem, there's also the fiddliness. I know a lot of people have complained about that because there are a lot of smaller pieces. I just didn't think it was as bad as I'd heard and somewhat expected it, given this was, again, like a shared infrastructure game. I kind of expected a lot of pieces to be on the board, and the fact that it's also like a pick up and deliver aspect to it. So it wasn't really an issue to me, but I can definitely understand if it was an issue for some, given how, again, bitty some of the pieces are. What I did end up having a problem with was sort of how restrictive, and to harken back to what Neil just said, how sort of basic the game ended up feeling. Even from the very start, I didn't really ever feel like I had too much trouble getting access to the resources that I wanted, which is you would expect to be the crux of the game. Yeah, sometimes when people built resources on the other side of the board, there was some issue in getting them, but only even then briefly. The game was by no means choiceless, but there just didn't seem to be too many very interesting choices to make, which is fine. You sort of see what part of the church you want to build, you make that your goal, you pick up the tiles that'll get you there, and you pretty much get there. And then while you're getting there, you probably fall into the option of fulfilling other contracts, be it at the market or church. While you're doing that, you sort of just have a goal, and as you're attaining it, which tend to be quite attainable, you sort of like find yourself in a position to do a lot of other things without really having to work too hard, I thought. Just a little less tight than I like games in general to be, particularly shared infrastructure games, where a lot of the fun, at least for me, is, getting at each other's throats over the scarcity of supply. That being said, one player I played with decided to try to play the entire game without acquiring a single additional worker. You can acquire more meeples, so he tried to play without acquiring a single meeple. That definitely did not work. The game is not that loose, so make sure, as with a lot of like worker placement games, if you play this, to get more workers. So it's not so loose that you can play like a very, very lean strategy, but still quite loose if you play it, I would say, normally. So all in all, I think a solid game. Just one that didn't really have me clamoring to get it back to the table. But if you're looking to dip your toe in a game with a shared board, or like the idea of shared infrastructure, or like tile placement and want like unique tiles to play with, maybe it's worth a play for you.
Is there something, Mark?
Yeah.
Like I look at the board and I'm kind of drawn to it in the same way that I'm drawn to like Archipelago, which is like, and I don't know how to describe this, and it's not something I would normally like be excited about, but it's like, on the island of the archipelago, I have control over the land of the pineapples, right?
Yeah.
And here you're like, you're building this board, and where your worker is where they're doing their job. And there's a little bit of like, I don't know, there's like this feeling of it being like an actual literal little village for some reason. It's not abstracted. I mean, it obviously is abstracted, but like the location of it makes me kind of want to like, I want to goof around with this for some reason.
Yeah, I can see that. Although, to be frank, like I said, the weirdness, for lack of a better term, of the tiles was sort of threw me off a bit, or was off-putting to me. But I can get how they'd be appealing. I would say, like, unlike Archipelago, you can't really be like the king of the pineapples or whatever, because it's such a shared infrastructure game. There is an aspect to it where you can be the person who makes the best refined materials. So there's something a little bit to that, but there's no ownership. And again, it's sort of like easy enough to get what you need, that you, again, just not cutthroat enough, not like this is mine enough, that you get really, I think, Archipelago vibes. Aside from the fact that, Archipelago, you build out the tiles and you get like a different looking scene each time. Certainly with Hamlet, you'd get that even more so with like the weird shapes and the way they can jut out or have these like odd empty spaces all over the place. So yeah, I think in a little bit of a way, but not one-to-one.
Plus, tile laying is boring, and Neelan made me play Isle of Skies again and confirmed it's still boring.
I like Isle of Skies. I think Isle of Skies.
You like Isle of Sky.
Still boring. I'll never.
The bidding.
To the grave.
The auction for that game is great. But anyway, that was Hamlet, the village building game designed by David Chirkop and published by Mighty Boards.
So I'm going to be talking about Tournament at Camelot. This is by WizKids and designed by Ken Shannon, Karen Baginski, and Jody Barbesi. This is a multiplayer fighty game where everyone starts with 400 hit points, and once someone gets to 0 hit points, the game is over, and whoever has the most hit points left is the winner. It takes the form of like a medieval tourney set in the Camelot mythos, so King Arthur and all that jazz. And the gameplay takes the guise of a trick taker. Now, I'm going to say that just to illustrate a lot of the mechanics that the game utilizes, and a lot of times I kind of found it unhelpful to think of it as a trick taker, so bear with me. On every tournament of the game, you're dealt a hand of cards. These cards are one of 4 weapon types. There are also alchemies, which can be used as any suit. Whoever is the lead will play one of these weapons, and that determines the lead suit that everyone else must follow. Everyone then plays a card of that suit, numbered 1 through 15, and once everyone's played a card, whoever played the lowest card loses that fight. They take all of the cards contributed, which will typically mean they're going to be taking 5 damage per card. Some cards are poisoned, which means they deal 10 damage. There are some other little mixes thrown in there, but that's the damage they are taking as a result of that fight. That player then leads the next trick, and this goes on and on like that. At the end of the hand, once everyone's played out all of their cards, you're going to take all of the cards you acquired from losing tricks and subtract your damage from your total number of hit points. If someone's dead, that is going to be the end of the game, and if you have the most hit points, you have won. Everyone also has a special ability. These are kind of built around the main characters of the mythos, so like King Arthur, Mordred, Guinevere, so on, which gives you a special ability as well as a second ability that will trigger once you're at a certain hit point value. There are a few little nuances to the trick taking that I kind of found this a little bit hard to grok at first, which is to say that if you have a card of the exact suit, you must play it. That so far, so good. If you don't have a card of the magic suit, but you have a Merlin, which is a wild card, which can be used as any suit, you must play that, and then only can you play this 5th suit, Alchemy. So there was kind of like a hierarchy to the way that you can play cards that I found pretty restrictive at times. But regardless, it's a fairly fun, silly lark. You kind of just keep going, trying to target certain people, like say, let's try get all the damage we can on Neelan, because now Neelan has a pile of poisoned cards and is going to be taking a ton of damage, and let's try to get Neelan killed. But meanwhile, you realize if you do that, then Emma is in the lead. So let's try to get Emma down before the game ends. The thing that I found frustrating over the couple of games we played of this is those turns happen very quickly, where someone can go from being near 400 hit points to just dead instantly. So it kind of felt like we never got to like use some of our fun halfway abilities. We never got to sort of have the dynamism of like switching who we were targeting. It kind of just felt like a lot of the times pretty arbitrary and over too quickly. And that was frustrating. It felt a lot more just of a lark than your average trick taker, but not in a way that I think was overly bad. You just kind of have to know what you're getting into. It definitely has the vein of that style of a take that target the leader multiplayer fighting game.
So this is compared so often, Neelan, and why I'm always wanted to play it. It's compared so often to Wiz War, and I think more contemporarily Cosmic Encounter. And so is it essentially like shorter than Cosmic Encounter through the lens of trick taking? Ha ha ha, we're all having a good time?
Definitely. Like, it's much shorter than Cosmic. I think that the things that I like about Cosmic, you know, like effectively the alliance building, like, hey, let's gang up on this person. Like, all of that exists here technically, but the game doesn't really last long enough or give you enough opportunities to really corral. There is one interesting mechanic that I think is quite clever, which does support this a little bit, which is if you ever play the same number as another card in the fight, then both of those cards are effectively removed from competition, which means that you can either support the lowest person in the fight by playing the same number as them and effectively removing both of you from contention. So then suddenly the next highest person is the person that is going to lose the fight. So there are fun moments of being like, oh, we all thought that Neelan was going to lose, but I'm going to come in and change this up by sort of helping them out. So it gives you the opportunities to do that, but a lot of the time I kind of felt that the card I had to play was dictated to me in a way that felt less so than most trick takers I have played. So yeah, definitely just something that you're just going to be like beer and pretzeling with rather than necessarily the most compelling strategic game.
And because I'm so, like, I'm genuinely, I think I have this sitting here, and I know there was a follow-up tournament at Avalon that most people prefer as, like, just a slightly refined version. If this could be slightly refined for whatever that means, because we don't know what it means, because I literally have not played either of these games, would that be like, oh my God, like, is this on the precipice of being something you really like, or you're just kind of, this will probably never be for you, even in its refined form? Because it sounds like something that I could end up really digging.
Absolutely. And that's kind of the thing I almost want to like end by saying is that like I do think there is an audience for it. And I do think that we could have a lot of fun with this, to be perfectly honest. I don't know what the changes in Avalon are for what it's worth, but it could well be something that would just be a couple of twists away from something that would feel better. I just don't know that would still work for me personally.
Yep. Because you don't like Cosmic Encounter or Wizard War.
I do like Cosmic Encounter. I still have Cosmic Encounter and will happily play it over Tournament at...
He's lying, audience. He's lying to you. Don't listen to him.
That is Tournament at Camelot by WizKids.
All right, here in the mid-cap, we wanted to tell you who won the last of the BGB Top 1000 draft series, 900 to 1,000. Thank you, everyone, for responding. I am happy and excited to share that we have usurped the King Nealon. King Nealon is dead. King Nealon has been defeated by challenger Kellen with a very close race, I'm going to be honest with you. Way closer than it should have been, so... And that was Kalis 1303, Adrenaline, Meeple Circus, Santa Monica, and Feed the Kraken, beating Nealon's list of Mosaic, A Story of Civilization, Clever Cubed, Unmatched Battle of Legends Volume 2 that no one has played, Lowlands, and First Rat. And as predicted, Mark, Ready, Set, Bet, Condottiere, Automobiles, Genoa, Homesteaders, he stuck to his guns.
DFL.
And stuck in with his sub 25% of the votes.
Dead last.
We have a $50 gift card to someone whose email address starts with Z and ends with m@gmail.com. We will have sent you an email. I don't know why. Can we not reveal people's email addresses? Oh, because then people will message them. Like when you win millions of dollars, you say, sir or ma'am, can I have
some of that gift
five
card?
of your dollars? Can you split gift cards?
That
depends on the retail of your choice. We'd have to look at their terms and conditions. We will not be saying at gmail.com's email address. And so thank you everyone for participating in the draft. The draft is not going away. We just have to figure out what we might draft in the future. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
No, Kellen.
At gmail.com.
No, can't do it, Kellen. All right, so let's go into our Designer Spotlight series, talking about the one and only Sid Sackson, by popular demand, if popular means Kellen, the great American designer.
There had to be one of them.
All right, Mark, we're
one
excited.
Great American designer? There's plenty of great American designers.
You're
Nealon.
An American, Nealon.
How dare you? Let's talk about one of the greatest. Let's talk about, I would argue, the first prolific of the designers. I know there were games designed before then, but I think it is probably unquestionable that Sid Sackson is the first great American board game designer. So he was born in 1920, and I think the story of Sid Sackson is an interesting one because it starts sad, and I think it ends sad. But fortunately, there's joy in the middle. It does sort of break your heart at the beginning, at the end. At least it's for me, researching the guy. So the reason I think it starts sad is because he had a tough childhood. And out of the struggle of his childhood, I think, is where he became such a great designer. So he grew up during the Great Depression and had a tough family life. He says that during the years of 1932 to 1939, his dad was out of work and they would travel a lot looking for work for him. And that caused him to have a lot of trouble finding friends. And as a result, he would end up being by himself a lot and would just invent games to keep himself occupied. In addition to that, his mom was ill. It was unclear from my research whether that was like a physical or mental ailment. So it just seemed like a tough upbringing based on the, the state of the world at the time. So again, was sort of a lonely kid. The family kept moving. And one way that the family kept their spirits up is that every week his mom would get him a game. So more about the collector impulse that Sackson had that sort of maybe a lot of people who are listening can feel some familiarity with or can empathize with. But what would become his world-renowned game collecting started as an early age. His mom would get him a game every week, and he would, from a very early age, just because he was playing these games over and over again and often like playing them with kids he didn't really know or playing them by himself more often, he would change the games. He would add rules. He tried to make them more interesting. The first example of this that he brings up a lot is a game called Piggly Wiggly, which I was not familiar with, but I've researched now Piggly Wiggly, and it seems like a not as interesting Candyland, if you can believe that or not. You have a road from 0 to 100, and you flip a card, and it tells you how far to go on the road. And that's basically all the game is. And he talked about how he adjusted it so that instead of having one pig that you were in charge of, you were in charge of multiple pigs. And by the end of it, it became like this war game that he had going. So he would modify games that he had picked up, and he would also create games. The first game that he got published was a design of his called Poke, which works with our current day because it was a trick taker that also melded aspects of poker. So that was his first published game. But by then he designed quite a few as a kid. But he went into school to become an engineer. He was a civil engineer working on battleships, actually. And in his spare time, he would...
Wait, he designed that as well?
No. He would work on battleships, like actual battleships. Oh, was that a joke? That was a joke. Okay.
How could you not know that was a joke?
Dylan plays it like poker face. I can't tell if he's joking or not. So he'd do this in his spare time. He'd work on these games in his spare time, but didn't really think there was much way to sell them. He just didn't know how to get in front of publishers. He didn't know where publishers were or anything like that. And it just happened that one day he was going to Gimbel's, which was a long defunct department store. And there was a guy there who was visiting the store with some games under his arm, and he was there to sell Gimbel's some games he had designed. And he starts talking to the guy. They strike up a conversation talking about how they're both into board games. And he tells the guy, like, hey, can you help me sell these games that I've been working on? And the guy's like, oh, that's interesting. Like, do you have any designs you're working on now? And he said, yeah, I've got about 100 games that I've designed. And the guy thought he was joking, but obviously turns out that he wasn't. So that guy put him in touch with his agent, and that's where his publishing career started. One of the first games that got published was a game that called High Spirits, which is sort of interesting because High Spirits was reimagined. This was in, let me see where this is first. So one of the first games he designed was a game called High Spirits, which was released in 1962. And it's sort of an apt game to bring up today because High Spirits was later redesigned or reimagined as a Buried Treasure, Buried treasure, as like a pirate would. And then that game was reimagined just recently as Buried, Berried treasure, the game about dividing pies up. I think, Callan, you played that, right? Buried Treasure?
Yeah, it was cute.
Yeah, I haven't played it myself, but I've heard it was like it's a pretty straightforward set collection type of game. So this is an early nod to his longevity. His impact on the field is undeniable, but in terms of the games that are still played today, it's actually, I don't think, that high of a number. You've got games like Acquire, which is probably his greatest design, although Can't Stop is probably up there as well. And you've got I'm the Boss, which is one of his later designs that are still being played today. So certainly prolific, but in terms of games that are played today, maybe not as much as some other designers. So after his early success with designing games, he got signed to 3M, which at one point had a board game line, which Sackson was the head of, and they had him go on a tour in 1965 to publicize this collection of like 6 games that he had, these bookshelf games. And it's funny, you can actually find his diary from the time, which is kind of a fun thing to look through. You can look at his correspondence with 3M, and they're like negotiating his like per diem and like how he's going to go on these TV shows and talk shows and talk about the games. And I was reading it, and part of it was when he was on a TV show, they were touting that he had the largest board game collection in the world, and the number of games he had was 500, which is funny given how many games a lot of people have nowadays. But yeah, a bygone time. When he was asked later in life what he would consider a good game, he said, should be easy to learn, yet have infinite strategic possibilities, give you the chance to make choices, create interaction among players, and take a maximum of 1.5 hours to play. I love that last part of it being so like precise. Like everything else is like a little sort of theoretical, and the last one is like got to be 90 minutes or less. I love that part of it.
And I don't disagree with any of that.
Yeah, I thought of Kellen a lot when I was reading that. Kellen, I think, would agree with that being a good qualification for a good game, right? Interaction and choices and all that kind of stuff. And 90 minutes or less.
Yeah, it is interesting trying to suss out what his design philosophy is, because it doesn't gel immediately. So it's interesting to hear him sort of say it. And then a lot of his games like seem like they're like pieces of paper.
Yes.
Like you play them on paper with, a quarter and Apple Jacks.
Well, he was like super well known for that. He has a very famous book called Gamut of Games. It's a book full of games you can play with like stuff around the house. And he was always tinkering with game design. More about that a little bit later, but just a little addendum to that quote I gave of his. He does say, of course, there are a few exceptions. Colin's going to be happy to hear this. Diplomacy takes a long time to finish, but it's still a great game.
There he is.
There you go.
This guy's so
coming
smart.
through. He's coming
so
through.
Smart.
In terms of the way he designed games, he said that he found his inspiration for games just by sort of like seeing something in the world that interested him and then sort of building on that. One example that he would cite a lot is Bazaar, which is a game I haven't played. I know, Kellen, you played, not such a big fan of.
It's
like sort of resource conversion, the game, right? It's like
It was like if you took all the fun of Splendor and then added a ton of annoying, like almost math-like conversions of 6 blue and 3 red and 1 blue makes this, and like you run it through these like super dry conversions. It was a pretty clever setup where the box itself like changed the infinite number of combinations, because you combine 2 cards and that shows you 1 of this equals 2 of that, which equals. But man, is that a dry game if that's one of his most notable.
It's funny that you mentioned that it's very mathy, because it was born out of helping his son with his trigonometry. So he saw...
Oh, goody.
Perfect. So he saw like the formulas for like sine and cosine, and just seeing like one side of an equation, the other side of an equation. And from that, he got the idea of making this like game full of conversions, and that became Bazaar. So a lot of his games sort of were born out of that sort of style of designing games. A quick note here about what I mentioned earlier, his world-famous collection. He would be interviewed often, and this was when it was more of an anomaly for people having these large board game collections. And, Tom Vasel is the king of like the standing in front of a bunch of board game shot, but Sid Sackson originated that pose, because a lot of the very few interviews you have with Sackson is him standing in front of like these racks and racks of board games, and people were asking him like how he acquired such a collection. And so he was saying, like, his quote is, when he got married in 1941, him and his wife would spend a lot of time doing jigsaw puzzles, but we got sick of that pretty quickly. We switched to games. We were friends with another couple who also enjoyed games, and afterward, they would come over every week and play. That's when he started casually buying games. Then he started reviewing games for a old magazine called Strategy and Tactics, where he got a lot of review copies for games. And then he said, I discovered rummage sales, and then I really got going, and it definitely turned into an addiction. And that's his quote. His collection would grow to, which I think is a legitimately incredible number, of 18,000 games. There's stories about him hearing from a friend that his friend in Pennsylvania heard about this game that Sackson had never heard of. And, Sackson had like this Rolodex of like all these game designs. He had, shelves and shelves and shelves of games. But a friend of his says, hey, I'm in Philadelphia. You ever heard of this game? And Sackson says, no, I haven't. And then him and his wife drive 3 hours to Philadelphia to find this game. He doesn't even know where the game is. He just knows it's in the city of Philadelphia, and eventually finds the game. So he had this like obsession with learning and collecting and sort of like curating this board game collection. And he had a lot of collection of like old board game books from like the Middle Ages and stuff like that. And so I talked about this briefly, but it's certainly worth talking about his most popular designs. I saw a debate that some board game designers were doing about Sackson's greatest design, and it surprised me that Can't Stop was their number one pick. They polled a number of board game designers, and Can't Stop was their favorite, followed by Acquire, which I think is the game that many people would consider his sort of magnum opus, his greatest game. His other highly rated games are Sleuth, which is sort of a better version of Clue. I'm the Boss. You don't think so? Oh, you don't like Sleuth.
I know.
like
I
Sleuth a
just
lot.
don't think it's a better version than Clue. But I quite like
Really?
Sleuth. Yeah, I would say so.
Clue, you have to like walk around to different rooms.
Yeah.
That's so dumb.
Thematic.
I hate that.
That's so dumb, Neiman.
I hate that part of it. I'm the Boss, Bazaar, which we talked about, and one of his games I think he was most proud of, which was Focus, which is also known as Domination, an abstract game that is sort of likened to chess and has been sort of renowned for how solid of a game it is and how tough it is to master. He says that he only ever lost a game of Domination / Focus once in his entire life, and that was to the editor of Games magazine, and that was the first time the guy played it. So Sackson spent all this time playing this game and had never lost in it, and then he teaches the editor of Games magazine and loses the first time, but I guess never again.
Like, Mark, I know it's about to get sad or whatever,
Yeah.
but before we do that, it's sort of like I have to make the plea. I have to make the pitch. You know, it's like if gamers have not played a Sid Sackson game, like what are we recommending to them? And I'll go first, right? Because I interjected.
Sure.
It's got to be I'm the Boss. This is a negotiation game that is as fun as it is dumb. And you can't get better. I've never played a better negotiation game. Sidereal Confluence tries and fails. What other? Good Critters? Are you a furry fan? Okay, then you can like play Good Critters. I'm the Boss. If you're looking for a sub 2-hour negotiation game, it just doesn't get better than I'm the Boss. Something I will always treasure and have in my collection. Could never see myself parting with it. It has some silliness and rough around the edges. I know this is also a game that Cole Worley likes to have people play at conventions, which I find really funny and makes sense in the context of games like John Company 2nd edition. But I think negotiation just gets a bad rap. We need to come back around. If we keep screaming at people, you know, you must do this. But I'm curious what your guys' take on what is the can't miss Sid Sackson game?
I mean, I think for me, it's hands down Can't Stop. The thing that I love about Can't Stop is it takes a mechanic that I feel a lot of people don't necessarily feel strongly about, which is very basic probability and dice rolling, and it builds the game around wielding that probability, which is to say that, hey, do you want to take the long road, which is going to be come up more likely, or do you want to take the short road that you're going to sort of see less and less on? And it's a 3-point race to get to the end of 3 of those tracks, and you get those sort of dramatic swings when people sort of bet on the harder path and have that pay off. It's a very silly, lucky, press your luck game, but I find it delightful.
I would even say, for fans of Can't Stop, I would say Can't Stop Express is also a really good game.
Surprisingly good.
Yeah, agreed. The problem with suggesting a game, I think there are some real gems. You guys have mentioned a couple, and we've mentioned the other ones. Acquire, I'd say Sleuth is another favorite of mine, and Focus / Domination. The thing is, like, frankly, you know, he's got a breadth. He's got a ton of different designs out there, although much less than you would expect, at least as far as are cited by BGG. He's only got 135 designs out there, which is also affected by the fact that, you know, he didn't do a million expansions for his game. So a lot of designers have these inflated numbers because of
He
every
didn't have
promo.
Kickstarter.
He didn't have Kickstarter, unfortunately. But I would say that while there is still that breadth of design, the ones that really held up are just a handful. But I would say that if you're a fan of confrontational games or games like Tigris and Euphrates and, like, just classic sort of games, I think Acquire, you've got to play Acquire, which actually started out interestingly as a war game that melded into an economic game. But you can definitely see the war game side of it because it's very interactive and just a really great game that I think holds up to anything released nowadays.
Before we go on to the sadness, I will do everything possible to not get to the sadness. It's like the existence of these books that just have like 30 games published in them. Does that not freak you out?
How do you mean?
It causes me like great anxiety, even unto pain. Because it's like, if you told me, oh, Kellen, you know, you need to play these 10 games of his, I'm like, okay, you know, doable.
Yeah.
That could happen sometime. But then you start looking at this book and you're like, there's 38 games in this book?
You're talking about the books he published?
Gamut of games, and then card games from around the world. It's like, it just like it starts weighing on you.
Well, I could say, as a person who's admittedly not played all the games in the Gamut of Games book, I could say you're probably okay not playing most of the games in Gamut of Games.
You have Gamut of Games?
I do. I haven't played many of the games in there, but I would say that they're okay. I mean, they're great because you can play them with what you have, but they're not necessarily the most interesting games, I would say.
That's really rude to say right before the aforementioned sadness.
You're trying to keep it from getting to the sad part, but you started the sad part. So let's get deep into the sad part. No. Well, I want to say, first of all, that going into this, I expected that maybe there was a chance that he didn't make very much money, or he just like was living, a difficult life in terms of finances because board games were not making the money that they do today. But I was happy to hear that that wasn't necessarily the case. He was working in his civil engineering job, and he was writing articles for Strategy and Tactics, and he's designing games. And actually, it's funny because it got to the point where a company he was working with, Hallmark, this is interesting. Hallmark was putting on a show in New York about board games, and they wanted him to talk about some of his games. And he was trying to, as he had in the past, whenever he did these tours, like the one I talked about earlier for 3M, he would talk to his employer and say, hey, can I get time off to do this? And they were giving him trouble this time. They were like not really letting him go to do this. And he was making enough money. In fact, he was making more money from the board games than he was as a civil engineer, that he quit. And that's when he became a full-time board game designer. So presumably he was making at least a decent living as a full-time board game designer. So I was happy to hear that. The sad part comes with the fact that he has this 18,000 board game collection, and he spent a lot of his later years trying to figure out what to do with it because he was afraid about what would happen to it. And so there were negotiations, or there were talks with, I know, like the Boston Children's Hospital, I believe, where they were trying to figure out if they could take the collection on and have kids play it, or just like put it on display there. There was always the issue. He always had a caveat where, and I don't think this was a demand of his, I think this was just something he understood needed to happen, that if he was to donate his collection to somebody or to some organization, he would have to be there to sort of like inventory it and sort of help get it organized, and just never seemed to have the time for that. So when he passed away in 2002, I was sort of sad to hear, and this was actually pretty big news at the time, that his entire collection was auctioned off in a couple of different like lots. And I feel like this was a fate that he would prefer to, like the game's just like going to the trash or something, but just sort of like the fact that it could have been part of a museum or something, some like sort of like thing that people could visit, is sort of sad. Although I will say that there is a silver lining. If you search Sackson Portal, all one word, on Google, you will see an effort to keep his games and his collection, at least a part of it, together. This is part of the Museum of Play, which is based in New York. And it's I would encourage anybody who has any interest in the history of board games or Sackson at all to check it out. Again, Sackson Portal will get you there. And they have pages and pages and pages of these really nice displays of games he was working on, like prototypes. They even have like his calendar, which is sort of interesting. Like he had one of these daily diaries thing where, every day in his like a little booklet, and they have every page sort of like scanned and on display, which is funny because there's like just a lot of empty pages, like June 13th, 1955, and this is a completely blank page, but it's a way to document like all his stuff, and you'll see some interesting notes in there. But the prototypes, I think, are the sort of like nicest thing to sort of look at and see like how he designed games. And he always said, like, you don't really need to put on a big production when you're designing games. As a lot of designers say, like just make it playable and then you'll go from there. It's also funny in terms of his design, playtesting is such a big thing, and justifiably so nowadays, but his playtesting group was basically his wife and a couple of friends. Like he never did really extensive playtesting at all. He said that the farthest he would go out for playtesters are like his son. And if he could get his son to play a game and he actually liked it, then he knew he had a good game on his hands, but did not do a lot of playtesting, which I thought was really, really interesting given the other designers we've talked about. And so, yeah, it may be like a little bit of a sad ending with the games being dispersed, but happy to see that there is a very accessible way to see at least parts of his collection. And just to close it out with a few words he had about the importance of designers. A lot of times back in the days he was designing games, they would leave designers' names off of a game. Milton Bradley and Parker would just design games without crediting designers. And he was one of the first to sort of push having his name on designs. It was a condition of the release of his game Domination. And so when asked about designers and them getting the credit they deserve, he said, a game is a work of art as worthy of being signed as a painting, a book, or a musical composition. position, the adventurer should have the right and the obligation to sign his work. And so just something that we sort of talk about today. And again, as with a lot of stuff that Sackson did, sort of prophetic and applicable today as it was back then. So clearly one of the greats in design history. And again, just one last shout out to check out Sackson Portal to see all these really interesting prototypes and game designs he had. I think it's really a nice thing to look at.
I've been looking over this gallery of his prototypes on this website, and it's just lovely. Just like look at kind of, you know, a lot of them clearly don't have directions based on the captions, but just seeing like the richness and the variety of like how many different physical prototypes he had is like such a lovely thing.
Yeah, it was clear he was always designing, and it's really like a historical piece. The same as like going in and looking at like a work of art from an old master or something. I think there's something to be gained from that.
They don't make them like they used to.
That's true. That's very true. So that is our designer spotlight on Sid Sackson. That is going to do it for that, and that is going to do it for the show. You can let us know what your favorite Sid Sackson game is by going to our Discord at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord and perhaps going to the podcast channel where we talk about that week's episode. Yeah, let us know what you think of his games. Let us know what you think of the Sackson Portal site. Again, I encourage anybody to look at it. You can also reach out to us in a number of other ways, including emailing us at boardgamebarrage@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter and Facebook and all those forms of social media if you just search Board Game Barrage. A big thank you, as always, to Heart Society for our intro and outro song, What's on Your Mind, Kid? And until next time, goodbye.
Huge thank you to at gmail.com.
No.
So bye.
Bye.
I am the Green Tank, and I'm joined, as always, by Kellen the Red Tank.
Yo, yo, yo.
And Neil in the Orange Tank.
Hey.
Oh, that
Sounds
was
like-
awkward.
I had like a Fat Albert there, reference for all the 70s cartoon fans in the audience. On today's show, we're going to be doing another...
I'm not sure we should be referencing Fat Albert in 2023.
That's probably true. Oh, well, the voice of Fat Albert was a problem.
It's a whole Cosby joint, right? Isn't that the whole thing?
I know he was the voice
I think
of
it's
Fat Albert.
like very much like a Cosby.
You didn't want to
production.
reference him. You shouldn't have gone, hey.
Okay, fair enough.
Well, I actually have no idea. I think it's funny because it's like, it reminds me of that joke that I love from What About Bob? You guys have it. He's there. You know the Rorschach ink blot test?
Uh-huh.
You know, like, what does this make you think of? And he goes, sex. What does this make you think of? Sex. You know, and he's like, oh, wow, all you think about is sex. And he's like, I don't know. You're the one showing me all the dirty pictures.
Yeah.
That's just kind of what you reminded me. You like made the gag and then got mad at Mark.
From losing tricks and subtract your damage from your total number of hit points. If someone's
I remember damage.
Say again? Wait, what did you say? I actually missed what you said. Okay, fine. Once someone is dead...